I'm Chris Wallen. I'm the Development Director for California Solar Electric. For those of you that don't know, we are one of the longest operating installers in the state of California. So we're very proud of that. Over 20 years servicing the Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Ojai communities. Woohoo, woohoo. And we're also obviously very excited to rally the community for Green Drinks. And for those of you that don't know what Green Drinks stands for or what our charter is, we're basically all about empowerment, cross-pollination, and let's see, what's the other third one, is identifying stakeholders around resiliency and sustainability. So when we talk about the issues that affect us all, we also know that a lot of the answers and the voices that need to speak up are in the community and in the audience. So we want to provide that opportunity to network and understand what the issues are and how it all interconnects. I've often said that I think a mapping project would serve us well, because there's a lot of coalitions and task force in our Ventura County, and I'm probably safe to say that there's some redundancy involved with all the different coalitions. So one day we'll get that. There is a new Ojai Valley guide that just came out yesterday, and there's a great article about resiliency and overall sustainability that's affecting our Ventura County. I encourage you all to check it out and read. There's a lot of good people offering insights and quotes, and I'll just say a quick shout out, sort of setting the tone of what's happening in our area. Our beloved utility, Edison, has come out with their resiliency strategy, and they have offered public power safety shutoffs, which mean that they're going to go ahead and shut our power off for 5 to 7 hours a day, maybe every day, until they think the risk of high winds or whatever it might be has died down. So this is the new reality for us, and so that sort of underscores the tone of what we're going to be talking about tonight, of what we can do to get ahead of that and think through that. So last here, also next month we're going to feature Steve Colome, who's going to be talking about the general plan. I don't know if most of you know this. There's a Ventura County general plan. It's the 2040 general plan, and we're going to be updating it after 30 years. If you can imagine, there's not a lot of true vision in the general plan, so we're making sure that everything sort of rolls up cohesively. So that's going to be important. That's next month. And then the following month in August, we're going to be talking about EVs and the bike master plan of what's happening in Ventura County. So we're excited about rolling that out as well. All right, so tonight I'm honored to present our presentation and our speakers tonight. We've got Christopher Danch from the Ojai Fire Safe Council, who will be starting. He'll be talking about our local resiliency plan. And then following, we'll jump right into Craig Lewis, who's the executive director for and founder of Clean Coalition, who's doing some amazing pioneering work in the space of microgrids and how that is the biggest impact for taking resiliency serious. I love his quote, in fact, where it says, all in all, if you think of it, a community that's resilient is more valuable than a community that's not resilient. So as we look at sort of how we're going to modernize ourselves and get into, reimagine what the Ojai Valley and Ventura County can be, it has to go through resiliency. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Christopher Danch up here for Ojai Fire Safe Council. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Christopher Danch. I am the Executive Director and Grant Specialist for the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. And we're here to talk about an initiative that we are bringing forth through the Fire Safe Council, and then one of the specific projects under that initiative. Before we get there, we'll go a little bit about the Fire Safe Council. We were founded in 2000. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. That means donations are tax deductible to us. Keep that in mind, everybody. We have, through the last 19 years, we have managed many federal funded grants to do a wide variety of programs and projects within the Ojai Valley. And that's important for the Ojai Valley because it's one of the highest fire risk areas in the state of California. And I am terrible with a microphone, I'm sorry. So as most of you know, most of our area is in what is called the wildland-urban interface, and that has grown in proportions as we've pushed into that boundary in our area, the National Forest, for the most part, more and more. I'm guilty as charged. My house is up on North Fork Springs Road, and I, in creating my defensible space, cut down quite a bit of chaparral. The CAL FIRE has classification zones, wherein much of our area is in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That's the highest, and then the rest of it is either high or moderate. So we are in one of those areas. The Ojai and Casitas fuel beds, don't you love that name? That is that's our area that we're in. It contains a great deal of flammable vegetation and very challenging terrain to deal. Our programs and projects are varied. We have education safety programs that we have done with homeowners and landowners, professionals and schools. We've gone through elementary, junior high, and high school. We have every 2 years we have a wildfire safety fair, our last one just being in April here in town at Zarzodi. We have a variety of vegetation management projects, which are primarily fuel reduction and the creation or enhancement of defensible space around structures. And then we've developed a number of online resources, which is on our website. There is an information page over here that people are free to grab that has this information on it, in addition to my business card, if you want to find out more about what we do and check out some of these resources. We develop a number of partnerships you can see here, and we work very closely with these partners in developing our programs and projects. What we have is a new situation which has become to our attention from the major fires of 2017 and 2018. Climate change is the primary driver of this. This new change is that we are predicting increasing extended droughts, and also followed by times of increased flooding. And we just experienced that with the Thomas Fire. And we've had droughts here before. That's a part of this of our area. What's driving this now is that these droughts have a higher temperature, a lower humidity, and they're extended, which means that the soil is dry and the plants are dry, and they are extremely flammable, more so than they have been in the past due to increased evaporation and transpiration rates. So we have a brave new world. And before the Thomas Fire, we rightly felt that we were a pretty prepared community here in Ojai. We have a knowledgeable community about fire, since it's been a major part of our lives, anybody who's lived here long enough. We respect and work on our defensible spaces around our homes and our other structures, and we have a well-funded and well-trained fire department. And so that was pre-Thomas, but after the Thomas Fire, after the Woolsey and the Camp and others, we've discovered that we have a new kind of fire, one that spreads extremely fast and very erratically, driven by these conditions, because other thing that happens with climate change is an increasing frequency of extreme weather events. The Thomas Fire is a great example where we had an unprecedented Santa Ana event. I've lived here my whole life, sailed these islands my whole life. I've never seen an event like that. Those kinds of winds for such a sustained period of time. And that's a new regime for us. So we are finding that we are not adequately prepared for this, either as a community or the public safety agencies. And anybody who's been paying attention around town, there's been lots of discussions and articles in the paper about how we're going to have to re-examine what we're doing here. So the Fire Safe Council is taking the leadership on a new initiative to develop and implement a long-term, comprehensive, community-based plan. And I want to emphasize that for a wildland fire strategy. Now we have back in 2010, the Fire Safe Council did what's called a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or CWPP. And that has not been updated since 2010. Since that time, it's been sort of replaced by the Ventura County Fire's Unit Strategic Fire Plan, which is updated every year. But it's time for communities that have to do more to protect themselves before, during, and after a fire. So our initiative is a significant expansion on the existing community wildfire protection plan. Primary goals, obviously, I just said them, to prepare and empower our community for wildland fires, to increase their resiliency after the fire, and affect a change of culture and attitude about we're facing a new normal. I don't like that term, but it's there. Where we're living, we have to be fire adapted to a year-round fire season and the changes the climate change has brought that we just discussed. Another thing for utility power in our Ojai Valley, we're in what's called a load pocket, the Clean Coalition. Craig will explain more about that in his presentation. But suffice it to say that we're grid vulnerable, that we're at the end of a single distribution connection and are very dependent upon that connection. And Craig will talk more about that. So as part of this larger initiative, one of our action items is to establish a community microgrid. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And that's going to be aimed at critical facilities, that being defined as a building, structure, or system where the loss of electrical service would result in the disruption of a critical public safety or life-sustaining function. We're also looking at eventually powering temporary refuge areas or evacuation centers like Nordhoff or Summit. And then as part of this larger initiative, we are looking at doing more community-based information and the communication systems to increase our decision-making on evacuation and things like that. And eventually the microgrid would be looking at making sure those stay online if there's a loss of grid power. We have initially identified 22 critical facilities for initial study in those categories you see up there. As mentioned earlier, Edison has had 2 responses. As we know, the Thomas Fire was caused by downed lines. We have this all across the state where we have an aging infrastructure for utilities, more prone to failure during extreme weather events. So their first response is the Grid Safety and Resilience Program. That's there to strengthen and harden the grid, as we say. That's currently in front of the CPUC. No one is quite sure what they're doing, but it's in the $500 to $600 million range of work. And then the second one is the one that brings us to today, and that's the Public Safety Power Shutoff, or PSPS. And that's where they intentionally shut down the grid during weather events. And while the intention is to promote public safety and not start fires, it does have the ironic potential of having a grid go down during the very event that needs to stay on for. So we're going to have to expect this is coming. Coming out of the CPUC's decision approving the public safety power shutoff guidelines, I won't read the whole thing, but their point is that we have these preventative shutdowns, and we have an increasing chance of the grid going down for other reasons. All kinds of unforeseen and foreseen consequences causing that to happen. And that's going to impact essential services, 911, other emergency services. So the bottom line is important. So therefore, emergency responders, operators of critical facilities, local governments, and electric customers, especially those in high fire threat districts like Ojai, should be prepared for power outages that occur without advance warning, and I would add during wildfire emergencies and other natural disasters. So we're proposing an Ojai Valley Community Microgrid for Critical Facilities project. We believe this will dramatically increase both the preparedness and the resiliency of the Ojai Valley by ensuring renewables-driven power indefinitely to these emergency responders and recovery facilities. It will also incrementally modernize our grid. Greg will talk more about that, and showcase the grid of the future and provide other benefits to us. So with that, we have, like I said, we have more information over here, how to get a hold of the council. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig at the Clean Coalition to explain the grid to it.
So I'm Craig Lewis with the Clean Coalition. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank Chris for, I want to thank the Chris's squared, for setting this up and partnering for this evening. Real pleasure. So I am going to talk about community microgrids, which are the solution for modernizing the grid and doing it in a way that brings resilience to communities. So just a quick note of who the Clean Coalition is, so you get a little idea who you're listening to here. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit organization as well, and we are all about accelerating the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And that is really important that you do those two things together, because you can't actually get a super high penetration level of renewables unless you modernize the grid. So those two things go together. But fortunately, as you get higher penetrations of renewables, you can bring an unparalleled level of resilience to the grid, and that is what community microgrids really are all about. So this slide just went forward for me. So a community microgrid is a new approach to designing and operating the electric grid. And it's doing it in a way that has a very high penetration level of local renewables, energy storage, and other distributed energy resources that are coordinated all together to make sure that you can get indefinite renewables-driven backup power to the critical community facilities. That is fundamental to a community microgrid. So the perfect place to pilot the first large-scale community microgrid is in what's called the Goleta load pocket. And I think if I asked if people are aware of where the Goleta load pocket is before tonight, there's probably not very many people that would raise their hands. So I will tell you, and I'll just go through a little detail here, the Goleta load pocket is defined by the portion of Santa Barbara County that is served by Southern California Edison. And that is the region that extends from Point Conception up here to Lake Casitas. So basically borders the Ojai Valley. And this whole region here is 70 miles of coastline. It is served by a single transmission substation. And that substation is right at the top, for those of you familiar with Santa Barbara geography, it's right at the top of Glen Annie Road. And the transmission connection that serves the Goleta substation comes along the backside of the mountains up from Ventura. That is right through the middle of the fire zone, the worst landslide zone, and the worst earthquake zone. So yes, we are very concerned about fire risk. There's a whole lot of other things we need to worry about as well, right? And all of those risks can take down this transmission line. And when that line goes down, Santa Barbara is essentially without its primary source of energy. So Santa Barbara and this region of Santa Barbara is super transmission grid vulnerable and is the perfect location for piloting a large-scale community microgrid. And that is the name of our initiative in the Goleta Load Pocket region is called the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. Very creative, right? Now, a couple of characteristics about what's required to make a Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid successful, and I'll say ultimately successful because it's going to take 10 years to get there to the full-scale Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. What we need to do is add 200 megawatts of additional solar. So there's solar people in the room. You know what that means, but let me just tell you, there's about 50 megawatts of solar in this Goleta load pocket today. So we need to take what's already there today and multiply it by 4 and get that much more solar into the region. That is a big task. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen with the existing policies and market mechanisms that we are having to play under. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. In addition to the 200 megawatts of solar, we need to have 400 megawatt hours of energy storage. And that's it's a bigger number. I said 200 megawatts of solar, 400 megawatt hours of energy storage. That is a lot of energy storage. Luckily, that is actually easier to get than 200 megawatts of solar. The 200 megawatts of solar, you've got to find rooftops, parking lots, parking structures to site all that solar, because in Santa Barbara County, just like around here, you're not going to be able to just plow over a hillside and put a bunch of solar up there, right? That's just not going to fly environmentally. So you need to have the solar coming from rooftops, parking lots, and parking structures. Built environments is going to be where the majority of that solar comes from. And I will just make a shout out to Catherine Van Berg, who is here. She's a local energy storage provider. Simplify is the name of the company, and they make a great battery solution. I will also give equal time to Tesla, who is in the room, and they obviously make energy storage solutions as well. But the solutions are here for the solar and the energy storage, and it's just a matter of getting them deployed. So when the Clean Coalition first got started in the Goleta Load Pocket, it was because Southern California Edison wanted to build a new natural gas peaker plant there. They actually wanted to repower an existing natural gas peaker plant, and the Clean Coalition came in and did a bunch of analysis to show that that is unnecessary, that there's a far better approach to take care of the energy needs through a community microgrid, and we did a bunch of analysis around that, submitted it to the California Public Utilities Commission. We got a win. We got the California Public Utilities Commission rejected Southern California Edison's application to extend the life of a natural gas peaker in the Goleta Load Pocket. It's called the Elwood Peaker Plant, for those of you who are energy wonks. And the next thing we did was we started to work with UCSB, because UCSB is the primary sheltering site, emergency sheltering site for all of Santa Barbara County. So if there is a really major emergency in Santa Barbara County, you are supposed to go to UCSB. But UCSB doesn't have any backup power for their emergency sheltering facilities, which is kind of a ridiculous situation. So we worked with UCSB to design a UCSB community microgrid to get indefinite renewables room backup power to their emergency sheltering facilities. The next thing that happened in Santa Barbara is the fires. This is in late 2017. And then the next thing that happened was the debris flows. And we lost about 24 people and about 10% of the housing stock in Montecito. And that is not okay, especially for a hometown boy. So I was living in Northern California at the time, but I grew up in Santa Barbara. And I said, I'm going to come back to Santa Barbara and I'm going to get this Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid Initiative really rolling. So I've lived in Santa Barbara now for about a year, and I'm glad to say that we've got it rolling. The first thing we did after the debris flows was to look at all of the solar siting opportunities in Montecito. And that's what this chart is. This kind of brown shaded area is the outline of the Montecito community. And all the little icons on there basically show where there's concentrations of solar siting opportunities on rooftops, parking lots, parking structures. And then what we did is we looked for the clustering of emergency response facilities, or critical community facilities. So fire stations, emergency shelters, critical water and communications infrastructure. And the area that really had the prime cluster for these critical community facilities is in the upper village area of Montecito right here. And for those of you who are familiar with Montecito, it's San Isidro Road and the intersection is East Valley Road. So right at that intersection, you've got the primary fire station for Montecito. You've got the water district headquarters, which is also the site for critical wells and pumps that get water up the mountain, and they're running 24/7 when there's a fire. Because the way fires are fought is you get water up the hill and then you gravity feed all your hydrants and everything, and that's how you get water on your fire. So those pumps are absolutely critical to make sure that the fires are contained. And then there is the primary school for all of Montecito. It's called the Montecito Union School, and it's right down the street and right down the feeder. And I'll show you some more detailed maps. In fact, let me go there. So this is that Upper Village. We call it the Upper Village Community Microgrid. And the fire station is right here. The water district is adjacent property. And then the Montecito Union School is down the street. This is San Isidro Road. And the electrical feeder goes right along San Isidro Road. So they're all electrically connected, these three locations. And the Montecito Union School is the primary sheltering site for all of Montecito, but there is no power backup there. So it's one of these situations where this is where people are supposed to go, and yet there's no energy to keep people sheltered. All right, so I'm getting the signal to speed it up. This is a block diagram of the same thing that I was just showing on the map. And so you got the fire district, water district, and the school. They are all on the same feeder. That exact same feeder comes right through the middle of Coast Village Road, which is where the primary commercial district for Montecito is. So ultimately, once we get these first three sites deployed, then our plan is to extend throughout the rest of Montecito and throughout the rest of the Goleta load pocket. Okay, so I think I more or less just said the same stuff, so I will speed it up here, and I will just say to do a community microgrid requires a lot of stakeholders to get aligned. And this chart shows, what all those stakeholders are. You got the municipalities and the policymakers. You've got the property owners are really critical, because if you don't have places to put your solar and your energy storage, you don't have anything. So you've got to have property owners that come out and play, right? Put their properties into play. You've got obviously the residents, and then you've got the people who are bringing the money, the foundations that will help pay for the work that needs to be done to stage all this. This is the money that the Clean Coalition needs to do its work. And you got the solutions providers like the Simplifies and the Teslas, and then you have the financiers. Those are the people who are going to pay for these projects to get deployed. And the last party, the last stakeholder here that I haven't mentioned yet is the utility. And to do a true community microgrid, you have to make changes and upgrades to the electrical grid, and you really need the utility to participate. Now, I put the utility in yellow here because so far, Southern California Edison has not really come to the table to participate. And it's a real shame that the utilities drag their feet on these new business models, these new approaches. The good news is that we're working at the California Public Utilities Commission to help force the utility to act. We're still working proactively directly with the utility, with Southern California Edison, to act. And I think that within about 2 years, they will actually come to the table and help us move this community microgrid concept into its full potential. Well, we can do a lot before the utilities participate. It just has to happen behind the meter, and that's a little bit of, kind of wonky discussion. But in order for a community microgrid to hit its full potential, you've got to move on to the actual distribution grid, onto the actual electric grid, the utility side of the meter. Okay, so Chris had talked a little bit about the fact that we're in a very grid vulnerable area here in the Ojai Valley as well. In fact, it is very similar to the Goleta load pocket situation, maybe even worse. So the transmission line that feeds the Ojai Valley is actually the same transmission line that feeds the Goleta load pocket. It starts down in Ventura, down here somewhere. It comes up, and that's this red line, and it turns into that purple line. And this orange line that comes off of that transmission line is the distribution line that feeds the Ojai Valley. The faint orange line. It is very, very faint, very vulnerable. So we are dependent here in the Ojai Valley. See, I've made myself an honorary resident already. We are we are very vulnerable. We are vulnerable not only to the same transmission line vulnerability that the Goleta load pocket has, but we are also vulnerable to a very thin distribution line connection that is unique to the Ojai Valley. So this is a very severe situation. I will just point out, I think Chris made this point, but I'll reemphasize it. The Ojai Valley, which is more or less in this rectangle, is right in the middle of the high fire risk zone. We are really severely at risk here, especially for fire. Okay, so what are we doing next steps? We are working on getting a grant. We're working in partnership with the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council to get a grant to do a community microgrid effort in the Ojai Valley. And the first step will be exactly the same first step that we took in Montecito, which is to do a solar siting survey and understand where we can site that solar. That is the gating item in terms of where you can get significant levels of renewable energy generation. The second step is to identify the critical community facilities. As Chris has mentioned, there's already been 22 facilities that have been identified. We need to then see which of those facilities can be clustered together, and then what we will do is we will pick the first cluster to move on and to actually roll out and do a community microgrid. And with that, we've got 4 people. Clean Coalition has 4 people here. We've got myself, we've got Gregory Young, Ben, and Doug. So if you have any questions for Clean Coalition, please find one of us, and we'll be happy to talk with you.
Thank you, Craig and Chris. That is awesome, and it is happening right now all around us. The vulnerability, the resiliency, Edison playing their part. So hopefully you guys heard some information and find yourself empowered and can help fight the cause. I want to open it up to the Q&A. Are there any questions out there? I imagine there are. Steve, go ahead. Why don't you start?
How did the transmission line hold up going to the Goleta in the Thomas Fire? Can you repeat the question? Yeah.
So the question was, how did the transmission line hold up in the fire that hit Montecito and Thomas Fire? Yes. So the transmission line was intermittent. It was up and down. It was on most of the time, but it did go down. And I will say, I'll take this opportunity to say that the fire station and the water district both have diesel generators, and both of those diesel generators went down also. So dispatch and the dispatch at the fire and the pumps at the water district were non-operational at times.
I just want to add a point about the diesel generators, because that's a common thing that comes up. People say, well, we have diesel generators. Why do we need this, right? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. The diesel generators in themselves are not the sole answer. And I will begin by saying that a microgrid is a collection of technologies and an integration of those technologies, which in most instances is going to include either a diesel or a gas generation system as a backup to the backup. That depends on what kind of loads you want, and I'm getting out of my pay grade here. But the thing about diesel generators too is that, one, they are very dirty. So as we move toward clean air requirements and permitting, because they've been exempted all along here, we're talking about a great deal of pollution, usually in very sensitive areas like Ojai Valley. So we have pollution standards that are very, very dirty machines to run. And the cost of diesel is going to continue to increase. And if we have these preventative shutdowns, then these generators are going to be running more and more than they would otherwise. They do require ongoing maintenance and running, and generators have been known to fail, just like the 2 went down and that mattered. So they do fail because people don't maintain them. They take a lot to do that. They only provide that benefit at the time during that emergency, where the microgrid has ongoing year-round benefits as well. So you have this renewables-driven backup system that does it, but also providing economic and environmental and resiliency benefits throughout the year as well. But we will tend to look to incorporate backup generation.
I think yes.
The station that comes up to the Ojai Valley, is that the Edison station in Cedar Springs?
Gregory, the question was the line that comes up to the Ojai Valley. Is it the one? Is it the coming out of the Cedar Springs substation?
It's coming out of the Santa Clara substation. Santa Clara substation. So the same. The Santa Clara substation. So the same
Thin orange line coming up the Ojai Valley?
So the answer is the transmission line originates at the Santa Clara substation. You're asking about the distribution line. Yeah, and I'm not sure what. Well, it originates there, but there's a transmission to distribution substation, and I think we don't know the name of that. We can find out for you. Yeah.
We pass that every day, That's
Yeah.
that's the grade there.
Right. So it's easy for us to get that answer to you.
Fire came from right there.
There's also a substation on Bryant Street over here too as well, which I believe is the line coming over there that we're talking about. That 66 kV line is coming over the mountain here from Ventura, and I believe it goes to the. I may be mistaken, but I think it goes to the Bryant Street substation.
Any other questions? We need y'all to order more beer and tater tots.
I got a question. So
How do we get on your mailing list?
I'll take care of that for you. Okay, I've got a question, and this is always the fun round because the right answer will win a $25 gift certificate to Topa Brewery. So the question is, what is the first site that's been approved for the Goleta microgrid? The first site that's already been approved that they're going forward with. Kathy Nolan for the win. Kathy Nolan, thank you very much. You are the proud owner of a $25 gift certificate. Please don't drink it all at once. Oh, go ahead and say the answer again. Correct. The Montecito Fire District Firehouse, however we want to refer to that. And that's what Simplify is also working on. So you see how we're connecting the dots here. It's great. So thank you. Anything else as far as questions? Yes. Yep.
At what point, if you're a resident and you want to participate in that microgrid, when and how will that happen?
So the question is, how do residential properties participate in the community microgrid? And the answer is that eventually that will be possible when the utility participates. For a residence to really be a participant in a community microgrid, they're going to have to stay online when there's a grid outage, which means their meter has to stay connected to the grid. And that means that they have to be contributing to the grid at times, which means they should have solar and energy storage at their house. And at times they'll be pulling off the grid. But it will be it'll be a give and take relationship in order to participate as a residential unit, unless you have a residence that has a medical need, for example, if there's a dialysis machine or something at the house. And I will say that in the meantime, before the utility participates, there's plenty of opportunities to have a microgrid at an individual residence, right? It requires solar and storage in order to do it as what we would call a solar emergency microgrid.
Will, existing homes that already, we see solar all over the place in Ohio. Will those existing homes automatically be part if Southern California Edison Park is participating?
So the question is, will homes that already have solar on them be able to participate in a community microgrid? And the answer is, unfortunately, if you just have solar on your home, you could actually participate in a community microgrid, but the kind of unfortunate answer is that in the meantime, when the grid goes out, that solar turns off. And so, if you had solar on your home already and you wanted to have resilience there, then the solution is to put an energy storage unit at your home and tie it in with your existing solar.
And I'll just add that gets into sort of the future of where the energy grid is going as it modernizes. We'll get into a virtual power plant, so to speak, that imagine every home not only will have solar generating their own power, but then the ability to store it with energy storage for every home. And that would also then potentially tie into a larger microgrid that could be at Nordhoff or at Summit. And so as Edison and CalSA and the state policy gets up to speed with how grid services and the buying and selling of energy storage, that gets into sort of that next level conversation of arbitrage and how are people going to share their energy? Because in a way it makes sense, because now Edison doesn't have to send all this extra voltage into our community, and that's what's gotten us into trouble in the first place. And so if we can generate more local power locally, right, then that's safer for everyone, and then you actually becomes an economic model for us where we can then, if our battery's stored with energy and we don't need it, well, and Edison has the modernization to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and buy this energy and give it to your neighbor, we'll compensate you for it. And that's where we're going. That's the exciting part of Next Level. I know that piqued a lot of questions.
Well, to that point, the Clean Power Alliance is already have plans so that any excess energy that you have, they're going to pay you a better rate than what Edison is doing now. So that's going to be part of the net metering. But we're already in a situation where with the Clean Power Alliance, we're better positioned to start getting some of these things to happen.
Okay, and
I just want to make sure. Whoops. All right. Here we go. Got a long arm. I just want to make sure that people understand this is happening now. You don't need to wait for a microgrid in your community. You don't need to wait for the utility to give you permission. People are installing solar. California, Southern California Edison, no.
California Solar Electric. California Solar Electric.
California Solar Electric installed panels in my home 20 years ago. 20 years ago, and every time my power went out in Ojai, I lost power. I lost the access to generation on my roof. The only difference in maintaining control of your generation at your home, your business, is batteries. If you have batteries, you can capture that generation during the day and charge your loads at night, and when the grid goes down, with the batteries and the solar and the inverters, you create your own island of generation storage, and you get to use it on your terms, when you want it, how you want it. So I just want to make sure we don't have to wait for microgrids. Your home becomes a nanogrid, your own microgrid, with a couple of solar panels and a couple of batteries. You decide what your critical loads are during a power outage. And these power outages are coming. In Northern California, 2 weekends ago, 27,000 people went without power because it was windy and it's drought. Ojai, we survived the Thomas fires, right? Our factory where we founded, we went through that. You don't have to wait. It's happening all over the world. That's what we're doing. And just know that 2,000 fires in the last 4 years are attributed to infrastructure transmission lines. 2,000 fires out of 16,000 in the last year in California alone. These numbers are serious. Anybody that's lived through these fires knows. And now is the opportunity to not react, but to build in resources to prepare. Preparation is so much more cost effective. And our company, yes, we founded in Ojai. We make non-toxic energy storage, non-toxic lithium ion without the cobalt. Cobalt is what causes fires, not the lithium. So we have a safe solution. We found it here, and our systems are going in all over the world. So I encourage residents, and we're starting a campaign all over California to build in this resiliency because it's already happening.
Right. I do want to add to that. I agree with all that. This is the last comment, but you know, one of the changes that the microgrids are doing, though, is there's a recognition that resiliency and sustainability is a factor of interconnection and interdependence. So what microgrids do is build an energy infrastructure that recognizes that interdependence, that decentralization, and that we were all in this together. So yes, there are options for your home that are important to take to island your home in times of disaster or power outages, but the grid is a way that we're going to integrate ourselves into a sustainable whole. And I just want to make sure that that's understood, that direction of taking this grid, that we want to take it, is to allow for that independence to flourish.
So I'm not sure if Chris has any more awards to give out for correct answers, but does anybody remember how many megawatts of solar and megawatt hours of energy storage we need in the Goleta load pocket? Wait, did we have the same person answering? Oh, Steve, what was the answer? All right, 200 megawatts, 400 megawatt hours. That's correct. And I just want to add on to what Catherine and Chris and others have already said, which is when you do something at your home, right, to your question, you are contributing to that 200, 400. So, right, every little drip fills the bucket eventually. So if you've got the wherewithal to do something at home, or you are concerned about the grid outages, which you should be, then you should go forward and do these things at your home or at your business, any place where you own property. You should move forward. And I think we got one more question. Is the battery storage going to be lithium ion in the microgrids that the Clean Coalition is talking about? In every case, yes.
How limited are we on that resource? Like, because that's my question.
So the question is, what's the limiting factor for lithium or any other critical input to a battery system? I'm not the expert on, mineral resources, but I will say that I think that it's a long ways away, and by the time we actually hit those kind of limits, we'll have new technologies that replace the current materials. So I'm not concerned about that at all.
Okay, and we will top it. So I know a question. Why don't I'll let you ask it, and then we'll go into the networking, and we'll talk, and we can answer your question. But go ahead and ask your question. They were, and they're down in Oxnard now, locally, 8 years. Ojai Energy Systems, and they are now Simplify. And she'd be happy to talk to you afterwards.